Hello friends! The 608 days of the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. One of the main topics remains the situation near Avdiivka. In its report today, the General Staff reports 10 unsuccessful enemy offensive actions in the areas of Keramika, Stepove, Avdiivka and Tonenke. Friends, today, unfortunately, I do not have time to voice more text in my voice. My robot friend will continue further.
At the same time, this morning, Ukrainian telegram channels again wrote about the advance of Russian troops north of Avdiivka. The military telegram channel Deep State reports that the Ukrainian armed forces, most likely a couple of days ago, lost a waste heap near the Avdiivka coke plant, an important height on the northern flank. Russian military telegram channels have been declaring control over the waste heap for several days. And today they posted a video with a flag from there. The waste heap is a height that dominates the industrial zone of the coke plant, which is one of the main fortified areas of the Ukrainian armed forces in Avdiivka. From there, all communication routes of the Avdiivka garrison leading to the west can be shot through. In a straight line to Orlivka, through which there is a major road, from there it's a little more than 5 kilometers. Another question is whether the Russians will install stationary artillery positions there. Ukrainian troops will likely work hard towards this goal. At the same time, the Russians can install posts on the waste heap to adjust fire, as well as deploy military personnel with anti-tank guided missiles for targeted shooting at the armored vehicles of the Ukrainian army. But in any case, losing control of an important height is a problem for the defending Ukrainian troops. Similar events in Bakhmut led to a significant complication of the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces in the city and on its outskirts. In the published video you can see how our units are leaving the waste heap, and also that our fighters were not having a good time at the top. The advantage of height was offset by the presence of drones on the enemy. The artillery rained endlessly, the drops from drones constantly pestered us. This is the result. How will the loss of the waste heap affect the defense of Avdiivka? Of course, the tactical position of our troops will worsen, but this is not yet critical. It is much more important to prevent the enemy from gaining a foothold on the railway or entering the Avdiivka coke plant. The enemy does not forgive the mistakes made in Krasnohorivka, especially when entering the trenches. Tankers have been deployed, writes Deep State. At the same time, Deep State also writes about the advance of the Russians to the west of Krasnohorivka, from where Russian troops came close to the railway track. Since yesterday, advanced enemy detachments have been trying to gain a foothold on the western side of the railway. This railway is also an important, although not the only, route for supplying the Avdiivka fortified region of the Ukrainian armed forces. The enemy has enough reserves and will continue to bombard our positions with manpower. Our reconnaissance and artillery are doing everything possible. The Russians are being fired at with cluster munitions, but this does not affect the intensity of recruiting personnel. Despite heavy losses, the enemy does not stop and does not regret your infantry, reports the Ukrainian telegram channel Deep State. To summarize, the situation remains threatening for the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russians are trying to tighten the Avdiivka stranglehold there, but they are paying for it with heavy losses. Russian troops there face the same problems as the Ukrainian ones during the offensive in the south. Equipment is identified and destroyed in advance. The entire battlefield is controlled by drones. Attack drones cause a lot of damage, as well as minefields. Therefore, in recent days, Russian troops have adjusted their tactics and, like the Ukrainian armed forces in the south, are now attacking in small infantry groups, slowly advancing and trying to encircle the Ukrainian army fighters. For the first time during the current war, the foot assault tactics began to be actively used by the Wagner PMC near Bakhmut. Thus, in 8 months, PMC mercenaries were able to capture Soledar and almost all of Bakhmut. However, the secret of Wagner's success was its readiness for huge losses, which was achieved by mass executions for failure to comply with orders, with the help of which ordinary mercenaries were made to understand that from the moment they entered the PMC, their life no longer belonged to them. This, as well as the presence of tens of thousands of recruited and absolutely powerless prisoners, allowed the Wagner commanders to launch wave after wave of assaults on Ukrainian positions. A huge number of attackers died in this case, but, in the end, the next wave captured the Ukrainian positions, or the Ukrainian armed forces retreated on their own, simply because fighting off the continuous attacks ran out of combat equipment. As a result, according to the data announced by the PMCs themselves, the level of losses among them turned out to be higher than that of the Red Army in World War II. That is, the level is monstrous even by the standards of wars of the 20th century. Prigozhin did this because he was solving short-term problems. He needed to quickly increase political capital through the victory in Bakhmut in order to prepare a rebellion. But it is not possible to scale this practice with such a level of losses in the Russian army. At least without a big mobilization, which the Kremlin is clearly not ready to carry out yet. And it is not realistic to introduce penalty discipline with mass executions on the spot in the regular army, turning it, in fact, into a huge penal battalion. This is not the Wagner PMC, which was completely outside the legal framework of Russia. Therefore, Russian military bloggers see a way out of this situation in the isolation of the theater of military operations. That is, in the destruction of the logistics of the Ukrainian armed forces through attacks on the rear and communications. To do this, it is proposed to increase the number of attack drones and turn the tide in the counter-battery fight, in which at the moment, according to Russian military telegram channels, Russia is inferior to Ukraine due to the use by the Ukrainian army of more accurate and long-range Western artillery systems. That is, the meaning of the proposed tactics is to deprive the advanced Ukrainian units of artillery fire support and the supply of ammunition through massive and constant strikes with various weapons on the rear, forcing them to retreat. Russian military experts and bloggers propose to do this in the Avdiivka direction, where Ukrainian units are already in a semicircle and their communications are subject to constant attacks. And it is possible that this, in addition to further advance on the flanks, will be the focus of the efforts of the Russian command in the near future. However, it is clear that such a threat is also obvious to the command of the Ukrainian armed forces, and therefore Ukrainian troops will also try to knock out the enemy's rear and try to uncompress the semicircle of Russian troops around Avdiivka. Meanwhile, the commander of the attack drone company of the 92nd Separate Mechanized Brigade, Fedorenko, announced the advantages of the Russian army when using drones. According to him, one group of Russian soldiers can use 50 FPV drones per day, while the Ukrainian army does not have such a resource. The enemy can afford to fly an FPV drone in standby mode. In order for us to operate an FPV drone, the target that we see thanks to another reconnaissance drone must be accurately confirmed. And in addition, we also select a backup target of lower priority. The enemy raises the FPV drones, and they go as long as the battery lasts, in standby mode, not towards the target. And this happens until our car, fire weapon, or something else appears, Fedorenko added.
Friends, considering what is happening in my country, this channel is now my only source of income. If you are able to support me financially, I will be very grateful. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.